Hello. Okay, so chapter 4 is like the most complicated. This is where I start losing students. I need you to stop the video, get a piece of paper, pencil, and a calculator. Um, this this chapter, if you don't get it, you need to replay it until you actually understand supply, demand, and shifts, and how it applies to market equilibrium. This chapter will repeat itself more than once this semester, so it's important that you grasp the basic concept of it and spend some time reading the chapter, making the notes, making sure you have the graphs and you understand the shifts and the directions they go, because if you don't get it, everything else for the rest of the semester is going to take a long time for it to click. So let's go ahead and get started. This chapter is about the demand curve, about the law of demand, the supply curve, the law of supply, market equilibrium, and how both bringing demand and supply together makes everybody happy. Then the effects the market have on demand and supply, and are we able to predict and explain market changes? If you notice how complicated it already seems just with this outline, please take this chapter extremely slow. We are on target, and I have no problem spending one more extra day on this till you get it. But take the time and understand the chapter. The demand curve. The law of demand states that basically we have a model where we assume everything is competitive. And if that's the case, then everything that we do is associated with the price. In this chapter, we developed this model of not only the model of demand, but also of supply. And we're going to analyze it. And we're going to assume through ceteris paribus that everything is perfectly competitive. Because if we have multiple factors, it's just going to get way too confusing, and that's not what I want to do in this class. So we're going to assume that it's perfectly competitive, and then we're going to apply that individual sellers are so small that they cannot affect market price in this chapter alone. Okay? Just with this. So what is a perfectly competitive market? Basically, that buyers and sellers are homogeneous products and that there's no barrier to entry. But what does that mean is that everybody has the option to enter a market. If they have something similar, they can compete on price. Look at cereal. There's so many out there, but everybody competes for that price. Gas. So many vendors out there that every vendor has something comparative that they offer in those two industries. All right? That is homogeneous. And then, as consumers, and we technically can manipulate the market itself. We have lots of demands and wants and desires, and when we hit that market, how much of a particular product we're willing to buy is one of the main factors in what adjusts that price. If we call this the quantity demanded, it's the amount that we are willing and able to actually buy. So if I have $100 and apples are $1, I could technically buy 100 apples. Am I wanting 100 apples? Probably not. Most likely I want half a dozen. So I'm not willing to spend all my money on one particular product. What alters the amount consumers are willing to buy is two things: the price and then everything else. the law of demand is affected by price, associated by price. So in this table, this is one of the first graphs you're going to need to understand. It's a downward sloping graph. It is what we call our demand graph. We have a price on the y-axis and a quantity on the x-axis, and the downward sloping line is our demand line. Memorize it. This table shows how many pizzas a consumer is willing to buy at a selection of prices. So at 10, they're not, doesn't have a specific quantity. But, excuse me, at $10, we only want one. At 8, I'll take 4. At 4, give me 10. At $2, I want 13. Notice that as the price goes down, we want more of it. This chart is what we call a demand schedule. You may have noticed it looks very similar to an XY plot graph, and that is exactly what it is. It's taking this chart and plotting it on the X and Y axis. So the law of demand states there is a negative relationship between price and quantity demanded, as long as everything else holds perfectly still. This curve slopes downward, and that is why we call it the law of demand. As the price goes down, so it so affects our actual ability to want. We want more. If the price increases, we want less. It is a downward battle for sellers to compete with us. They're not going to win. We want the lowest price possible. As prices rise from 8 to 10, the consumer buys 3 fewer pizzas. This change in quantity demanded changes the actual demand of what we want number-wise. A change in quantity consumers are willing and able to buy when the price changes, represented graphically by moving along the demand curve. So a change in quantity demanded moves along the curve. Quantity moves along the curve, up and down that line. This is what gets people, this is the difference between this and a shift. When we deal with quantity, we're moving along the price with the quantity, along the line. Now, if I were to combine it into a market of one firm, so let's say the Pizza Inn. There's not just one Pizza Inn, there's multiple Pizza Inns or Pizza Huts in your case. If we were to add the quantity demanded by each consumer at each price given, that's going to give us a market demand curve for pizza. So a market demand curve shows the relationship between price and quantity demanded by all consumers in that industry. Now, if we said aggregate, that's a totally different story. So keep in mind, when I say market demand curve, I'm talking about micro, and I'm talking about an individual industry. So market demand curve is when we combine multiple stores in the same industry based on what they sell and the price at each level. So Al's number 2309, Pizza Hut. His demand, he had for $8, 4 pizzas per month. For $4, he had 10. But B's 3010 at $8 only sold 2, and at 4 only sold 6. But when we combined them together for the $8, there was a grand total of 4 plus 2, giving us a total of 6. That's the market. At 4, we take the 10 and the 6, and that gives us 16 for all the stores at $4. Notice that the slope went from steep to more horizontal. It leveled out some. Market equilibrium takes that slope and adjusts it. And again, we have a market demand schedule. So how do we apply this? Let's just take an old article, Young Smokers and the Law of Demand. So as the price decreases, y'all might think, oh, in your day and age, that would be vape, okay? As the price decreases, the quantity of cigarettes or e-cigarettes demanded is going to increase for 2 reasons. People who already smoke chose to smoke more, and some, usually the young people, start smoking, pick it up because it's cheap. Keeping cigarette prices high, though, or increasing them with taxes, is one way that the government can try to discourage young people from starting to smoke. We add what's called a luxury tax, and the more tax is to encourage people to quit. It raises the price of the actual cigarettes, making them less desirable or less in demand. When you raise prices, demand backs off. So now let's switch. That's all demand. Now put that aside. We're going to start with a different curve. Call it the supply curve. The difference between that is that supply is not associated as much with price. What supply is how much of a particular product firms are willing to produce and sell for a particular period. We call this the quantity of supply. Quantity supplied. What firms are willing and able to sell. Notice that it's similar to what consumers want, but it's different. What alters the amount firms are willing to sell? Again, it's technically driven by price and everything else, but it functions differently, okay? Keep in mind, price is associated with it, but it's going to function differently. This is number one difference. Notice, as we just look at the graph, that it's upward sloping. Suppliers want to make money. So as the price goes up, they want to sell more. They're willing to sell more. So they will have more to sell at a higher price. They will have less to sell at a lower price. So the table shows many pizzas a firm will sell at a selected price. This is considered the supply schedule, just like the demand schedule. So those are the similarities. That's why everybody gets it confused. This shows the relationship between price of a product and the quantity supplied as long as everything else stays the same. So if we look at this one, the price again is on the y-axis. The quantity is always on the x-axis. And notice that at B, the price of $4, they sold 100. But at 10, they wanted to sell 400. The price going up increases the quantity. This is the difference. It's an upward sloping curve. We plot each of the price quantity pairs on the graph, joining those points, giving it an actual curve for pizzas. The curve shows that the relationship between price of a good and quantity supplied by an individual firm, ceteris paribus. It's just a relationship. It slopes upward, so typically we call it the law of supply because it is a positive relationship between price and quantity supplied. Whereas demand was a negative, the law of supply is positive as long as everything stays the same, ceteris paribus. There are some prices below which the firm would not provide any pizza. For this firm, that's the minimum supply price, which is at $2. Minimum supply price is the lowest price at which a product will be supplied. Notice that it's very little, and in this case, 0. As the price rises from 8 to 10, the firm is willing to provide 100 more pizzas. This is a change in quantity, and a change in quantity states that they are willing and able to sell when the price changes, representing movement along the supply curve. Quantity supplied also moves along the curve. From A to B, from B to C, C to D to E. Along that curve, increasing with the price. So why is an individual supply curve positively sloped? A higher price encourages firms to increase its output by purchasing more materials and hiring more workers. Even if the new materials are more expensive or the new workers are more costly or less productive, the firm is willing to incur those higher marginal costs to sell at the higher price. This is consistent with that marginal principle, where the increase in level of activity, as long as the marginal benefit exceeds its marginal cost, choose the level at which the marginal benefit equals the marginal cost. You need to memorize why. MB, as M as in marginal benefit, equals MC, marginal cost. Memorize it, have it in your notes. The price is the marginal benefit. The supply curve shows the firm's cost of production. We're going to see this later. In a perfectly competitive market, a marginal benefit will equal a marginal cost, and the firm stays in business. Anything outside of that, if its benefit is higher, perfect, that means profit. If the cost is higher, that means they're losing money. They'd rather make a decision to raise prices in order to make the profit. They've got to have MB equals MC or the benefit to be higher. So when we add for a market, we add the quantity supplied by each firm in an industry. Each price gives us the market supply curve. So we'll take Lola's Supply Company. We're going to say that she's the cleaning supply lady. And Lola's individual she's a pizza, my bad. Lola's Pizzas, my bad. So she sells pizzas at her store. Hiram sells it at his store, and then you combine them. This is the time when you combine the supply curves that you will find that it bends. Whereas the demand slope went horizontal, the supply curve will bend. When you start out at 0, and let's say $2, you'll notice that Lola, that's her minimum. But Hiram's is different. He won't do anything less than 6. So then you have to take, for the market, Lola made money between 2 and 6. But when you combine them at 6, that's when the slope then goes more horizontal. You don't combine the curves at 0. You combine them at their market beginning price. So Lola started at 2, so she gets 200, 300 pizzas sold before Hiram will even sell his. And then you combine at 8, Hiram did 100, Lola did 300. That's a grand total of 400 pizzas. At 10, Lola did 400, Hiram did 200. That's a grand total of 600 pizzas. The bend happens at $6. Only Lola was selling. In a perfectly competitive market, hundreds of firms rather than just 2 are involved. In this case, many firms, the market supply curve will be smooth rather than kinked, because that small benefit is going to be somewhere in that curve. We assume that there are 100 firms identical to Lola's, so you're not going to see the bend as easy when you do all, let's say in a nation. It's going to be a smaller, noticeable change. You'd have to get really close with a magnifying glass to actually see the change. There are 2 reasons, though, that the supply curve is positively sloped. As the market price increases, number 1, individual firms increase output by purchasing more materials and having more workers. New firms also then enter the market. That's number 2, which are also then which have been encouraged by that higher price. Profit is the motivation behind suppliers. But in order for it to be an increase, they're going to have new materials and more workers. And as that individual supply curve, the market supply curve shows that marginal cost of production, this time for the market as a whole, though. So let's look at sheep wool and the law of supply. It basically became almost non-existent prior to the 1990s. The world price of wool decreased by about 30%. And the law of supply suggests that wool output would decrease. It did. Wool exporting countries like New Zealand converted their land to more profitable uses like farming, like dairy farming, forestry, timber, and wine production, or other alcoholic beverages, because it was not popular. They weren't making any money. So sheep industry shrunk. Now if we've got law of supply, we've got law of demand, now we need to put them together and understand an equilibrium. Because there's at one point everybody is happy. And in order to explain that, we've got to bring them together. By explaining the role of price and reaching that market equilibrium, we find out that there is a point at which everybody will agree. So a market's basically an arrangement of buyers and sellers, right? Well, you're not going to have a lot of fist fights in a grocery store. Well, I mean, depends on what day it is. Black Friday is a fight sometimes. But for the most part, everybody's going to agree. They're going to take it and go. These buyers and sellers jointly determine prices and quantities traded. You shape what is sold on the shelves of your grocery store. You don't buy it, it'll disappear. You buy a whole bunch of it, and typically, unless you're Walmart, typically it'll keep staying on the shelves. This is because of market equilibrium. It's a situation which the quantity demand equals the quantity supply at prevailing market prices. And so when a market is in equilibrium, think of it as a seesaw, and you've got equal balance on each side of the board. At first, when demand jumps on, supply is high. But Once supply starts going down, demand backs off and is up in the air. But if you can find that equal weight, eventually you'll be on parallel to the ground. There's no pressure on the price to actually change. You'd have to add something in order for it to change. So at the market equilibrium, we've got our X and Y graph. Our price is on the Y on the price is on the Y. Quantity is on the X. Basically, it looks like an X on there. Demand goes down in the blue. Supply goes up in the red. And if you notice, they cross at A. I like to write it as ME. Stands for market equilibrium, but if I put ME, that's me. I'm happy, right? I know it sounds corny, but if you write ME, me, I'm happy, it may click. And market equilibrium price at A, with the price at $8 and the quantity at 30,000, the quantity supply equals the quantity demanded. Everything from $8 to $12 would exceed the market equilibrium price. That's going to cause an excess in supply. Anything above $8 will cause an excess in supply because demand is declining. And that's going to cause the inventory either to not shrink or to be in surplus. Everything below $8 will create a run on your demand, causing an excess demand or a shortage. Everyone willing to pay $8 receives a pizza, though, for that price, and every pizza firm is willing to produce it at $8. Market equilibrium's at A. Again, at price below the equilibrium price, there's an excess demand. The quantity demand exceeds the quantity supplied. A situation in which the prevailing price, the quantity demand, exceeds the quantity supplied. This mismatch causes the price of pizza to rise. Firms will realize they can raise the price and still sell all the pizza they plan to sell because demand is there. In order to balance out that seesaw, you got to get demand to slow down. At a price of the equilibrium, there's an excess in supply. The quantity supplied at point E exceeds the quantity demanded at point D. A situation in which the quantity supply exceeds the demand at the prevailing price. This mismatch causes the price of pizza to fall. Firms will realize they cannot sell all of their pizzas at the prevailing price and will start undercutting each other. That's when you have to add the weight of price downward on supply. How do we apply this? All right, so the European Union guarantees minimum prices for agricultural products like grapes. These are above the equilibrium price, encouraging overproduction. I wanna, which the EU guarantees to buy. The recent reforms have reduced and in some cases eliminated these price guarantees, resulting in shrinking excesses or wine lakes and butter mountains. What does that mean? If these price guarantees aren't there, I'm not going to produce. I'm not going to have excess grapes. So I'm not going to swell into the old market at lower prices. I'm going to raise my prices. All right, so how does this affect? How do I play the seesaw game? All right? The effect of a change in demand on the equilibrium price. If we just deal with demand, market equilibrium occurs when the supply equals the quantity demanded. But Changes in demand on the market can affect the price and the quantity in its equilibrium state. So demand can affect equilibrium price and equilibrium quantity, can change it. Demand can, but how? All right. So if we're looking at, typically prices move along that demand line. Prices going down will move it along. But what's going to make it change to a different demand? What's it going to make it go from, I'm still willing to pay 8, but I want more for my money, or I'm wanting more of it? So let's say if we're looking at the B, a change in demand. I'm originally at 8, which is at the letter A. That's my initial demand. What's going to make me go from A to C, going from I want 30,000 pizzas to 46,000 pizzas at $8 each? This is causing a change in quantity demand. Typically, we would move along, but a decrease in price is going to move from A to B. What's going to be, if it's not a decrease in price, what's going to be? All right? So how about this? Before I get to the next slide, what if I gave you a pay raise? And instead of $100, you're now making $200. Can you buy more of it now? Or what if there becomes where I get pizza and a Coke? Or the Parmesan cheese is less expensive now. These are some similar situations that may affect this demand. Panel B shows this change in demand causes by changes in a variable other than the price. This shifts the entire demand curve. Either it's going to be a positive shift or it's going to be a negative shift. So an increase in demand shifts the curve from D1 to D2. A decrease in demand will shift it the other direction. So a change in demand, which is a shift of demand curve caused by a change that's other than the original price. Price is not the factor anymore when we shift demand. Price is only a factor when we're moving along that demand curve, but not when we shift. Make sure that is in your notes and you're clearly separating the two. So what would cause the demand curve to increase? A shift to the right. It's anything other than a price decrease that makes consumers want to buy more. An income change. For example, consumers buy more vacations, new cars, houses, new clothes. They spend more when they get a pay raise. We call these normal goods. But consumers buy less of some goods, like secondhand clothing, ramen noodles, frozen goods as opposed to restaurant goods. When their income increases, these other examples are inferior goods. They don't want to buy them when they get a pay increase. They want more than normal goods. I look at it as I'm a single mom. I'm on a limited budget. I buy non-brand name goods. But I get a pay raise, so I can have a special event. I can now buy brand name goods. Hopefully that helps clarify. Off the market or non-name brands are not necessarily, they don't have all the flashy, the extra, sometimes taste is different, but that brand name we all associate as being better quality. So a normal good is basically a better quality good, which an increase in income increases its demand. An inferior good is a poor quality good for which an increase in income decreases the demand. I don't want it anymore. I want Campbell's soup instead of ramen noodles. More for my bang. Here's some other examples. An increase in the price of a substitute good. Tacos and pizzas are technically on two different industries. They're food, but you got tacos, which is Tex-Mex. You got pizza, which is Italian American. When the price of tacos rises, some people switch over to pizza. When pizza rises, you flip over to tacos. Alternative food choices. Hamburgers and hot dogs. Trying to think of a good. Gucci versus Calvin Klein. They're two brands, but they may be different. So just keep in mind that sometimes it could be the same brand, but yet different. Something's different about them. One may not be as popular. Decrease in price of a complementary good. I buy a printer, and the paper and ink are cheaper. Pay-per-view sports events and pizza are complements. You watch pay-per-view, you eat pizza. Hamburger combos, hamburger, fries, and drinks. Buy two, get one free. They're complements. When the price of a pay-per-view, technically in this example, falls, more consumers watch it and buy more pizza to consume it. When price falls, you buy more complementaries. Substitutes. Two goods for which an increase in the price of one good increases the demand for the other good. Complements. Two goods for which a decrease in the price of one good increases the demand for the other good. How many of you buy ketchup with your French fries? The price of ketchup goes up. Are you going to buy French fries? And if you said no, I'll buy cheese now, you know what I'm talking about. Even more examples. How about the increase of population? If there's a really long line, that means more potential pizza customers, right? That'll shift the demand. It does affect price, but it'll shift demand. Shift in consumer preferences. Consumers might decide to like for pizza more than they used to. A successful pizza advertising campaign might increase the demand for pizza. Hey, I'm sorry, but that garlic butter on the crust was more appetizing than plain crust. Got my attention. Expectations of higher future prices. You buy now and save later. So if consumers learn that pizza prices are going to increase next week, they're going to buy more pizzas this week and save for next week. So memorize what this does, and remember that when it's the variable, it's going to increase or decrease. So a positive income for a normal good is going to increase. A negative, a change in income with an inferior good is going to decrease. Price of a substitute good will go up. What's it do? It shifts the demand. Price of a complementary good goes down. Population increases. Population decreases. Consumer preferences for goods. Expected future prices. These shift the demand to the right. These right here shift to the right. Make sure you pause and copy all these into your notes. All right, so if we're doing that, how does it affect the price of an equilibrium price? So if an increase in demand shifts it, it's going to change the price somehow. So at each price, the quantity demanded has increased. And if we look at originally, it's at $8. There's an excess in demand the quantity demanded goes to point B, exceeding what is being supplied at A. That excess demand causes the price to rise, and the equilibrium price then bounces back to C. So, if we were to draw an arrow, we go in the direction of A to B is the initial cause, B to C is the effect. We went from A is the original to I'm now at a demand. I went from 30,000 pizzas, now I want 46 at $8. Well, suppliers say, you know what? I'm not willing to do that, but what I will do is I'll raise the price to get you to back off on your demand. I'll raise it to $10. That means that you're only going to want 40,000 pizzas. I can meet you at 40,000 with $10. Cause A to B, effect B to C. The result of the increase in demand, the equilibrium price rises to $10, and the equilibrium quantity of pizza rises to 40,000 pizzas per month that they can actually agree upon. I don't want to sell 46,000 at $8. I want to sell 40,000. Okay, fine. You've met demand. The price is happy for everybody, but it's higher than it originally was. Generally, we can predict an increase in demand will increase the equilibrium price and increase the equilibrium quantity. What decreases? The exact opposite. Everything I said before that shifted it to the right put a negative effect to it. I lost money. I'm not going to buy normal goods. I lost money. I'm going to buy more non-name brands. The price of substitutes went down. I'd rather go buy that other. I'll take the substitute. The price of complementary goods, I don't want it anymore. I can't deal with it anymore. Population decreases. Well, guess what? That means that the supplier's not going to have as much demand on them anymore. That 11 to 3 shift is going to have less people in it. My consumer preferences, instead of Vans, I want Nike now. Instead of Gucci, I want Calvin Klein now. Expected future decreases will create a less demand now and a future demand increase in the future, a future increase in demand. So these are all shifts to the left. Make sure you memorize them and you have these in your notes. One is going to the right and one is going to the left. I like to do a cheat sheet. So I need you to visualize. If you put an X and Y graph, draw an X and Y price quantity L. Put the demand, put a plus sign to the right and a minus sign to the left, and draw your shifts. The plus sign is a positive thing. The minus sign is a negative shift. If you can remember the positive versus the negative as a cheat sheet for this chart, you are ahead of the game. That's my cheat for you. Plus on the right, minus on the left. A decrease in demand shifts the demand curve to the left. At each price, the quantity demand is going to decrease. So if we're back at our $8, there is an excess in supply, which exceeds the quantity demanded. So from A to B, excess supply, we know that excess in supplies drop the price. You got too much, you're going to have to bow to my demand. The equilibrium price is then stored at point C at a lower price. So A to B is the cause, B to C is the effect. It creates an excess, drops the price. lower equilibrium price, lower quantity. Went from 30, now I can't afford 30, I only want 14. That's not good enough? Fine. Drop the price to $6 and I'll buy 20. Compensation. Equilibrium. The result of a decrease in demand, the equilibrium price falls to 6. The equilibrium quantity of pizzas falls to 20,000 per month. Generally, we can predict that a decrease in demand will decrease the equilibrium price and decrease the equilibrium quantity. Memorize that part. Craft beer is on the rise, and so is the price of hops. Between 2012 and 2017, U.S. craft beer production increased more than 30%. Home brew. Craft beer brewers increased their demand for ingredients, including hops. As a result, the demand increased. The equilibrium price of hops rose substantially from $3.17 to $5.92 per pound. All because people like their homebrew beer, that gourmet beer. That's one example. But now let's shift it to the supply. All right. What happened to demand, keep in mind, is different than what affects supply. Describing the effect of a change in supply on the equilibrium price, we take the market equilibrium curves when that quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. But changes in the supply side of the market can affect the equilibrium price as well as the equilibrium quantity, just like in demand, but for different causes and for different amounts. So if we looked at the supply, we know that the change in quantity supplied is a movement along the single supply curve based off of price. An increase in price causes a movement from point A to point B, increasing the quantity supplied. But what does the shift do? Why the change in supply? A change in supply is going to not move along, but move the line differently, left or right. These are some of the reasons what could cause the supply curve to increase or shift to the right. Another thing, anything other than a price increase makes firms want to provide more of a good. So, let's say wages drop. That means that technically my costs drop. I can produce more now. Wages or the cost of materials go down. Production becomes more profitable. So we expand. Technological advances. If I can speed up that process, I make more money. So new technologies can make production more profitable and hence encourage expansion. If the government helps me out, and I'm not going to lose any money, so like a payment from the government is going to also make production more profitable. Didn't cost me anything. I'm making money. Guess what? Thank you so much for that subsidy. Expected future prices falling. If I know that they're going to fall, I'm going to produce quickly. So I can try to hurry up and sell before that price change. And if the number of producers or more firms means more production. If I can have a Starbucks on every corner, that means I sell more coffee, right? If theory was accurate, technically, if I had competition, if I had Starbucks, McDonald's, and What's the new one? Is it shooters? Scooters? They were all in each corner. The competition will drive the demand because the prices are going to shift. Memorize these, okay? So here's an example in hopefully a chart form to make it easier. Wages decrease. That's going to shift to the right. Price of materials or capital decreases. Shift to the right. Technological advance or innovation increases production. Shift to the right. Government subsidy checks. Shift to the right. Expected future pricing, meaning expected future decreases, I'm going to produce more now. Number of producers increases. That means that the market's saturated. All right? Make sure that's in your notes. An increase in supply shifts the supply curve to the right at each price. The quantity supply then increases. At the initial price of A, at $8, there's an excess supply with the quantity supplied at point B. What does it do? Exceeding the quantity demanded at A, the excess supply causes the price to drop, and the equilibrium then is stored at C. So, just like in demand, that A to B is the cause. Got now I have excess. I don't need to sell it at that price. I can decrease it and probably drive demand some more. Never-ending cycle. Remember that. So I'll drop from B to C is the effect. A to B is the cause. B to C is the effect. Start at A at a higher price. Increase in supply drops the price to C. The result of this increased supply, the equilibrium price falls to 6. The equilibrium quantity of pizza rises to 36,000 per month. Generally, we can predict an increase in supply will decrease the equilibrium price and increase the equilibrium quantity. We just don't know how much. We can plot it after the fact. Typically, we can predict the increase will decrease price and decrease the quantity. Exact opposite happens when wages increase. I cut back on production. Can't afford it. I might even lay off some people. Price of materials goes up. Well, again, I might lay off some people, or I may not make as many. So I could probably raise the price. Taxes. When I get corporate taxes, and I have to roll that price over to the consumers, I'm going to back off on production. Expected future prices increase. I don't want to make it right now, but I'll have it ready for next month. Number of producers decrease. That puts a hurt on the suppliers. That means that they're going to raise the price. So a decrease in supply shifts the curves to the left. At each price, the quantity supplied decreases. At the initial 8, there's an excess in demand. We go from A to B. So with the quantity demanded at A, we exceed the quantity supplied at B. The excess demand causes the price to rise from B to C with the equilibrium restored at a higher price. I'm going to supply a little bit more, but I'm also going to have higher prices. Decreases the demand some. All right, the result of the decrease in supply, the equilibrium price rises to 10. The equilibrium quantity of pizza rises to 24,000 pizzas per month. Generally, we can predict a decrease in supply will increase the equilibrium price and decrease the equilibrium quantity. So what happens to the equilibrium price and quantity when both demand and supply increase? This is not charted, so it depends which change happens to be larger. Memorize that one. It depends on which change is larger. If the effect on demand is larger, then the overall change will look like the change in demand. If the effect on supply is larger, then the overall change will look like the change in supply. It depends on which change is larger. Memorize this. So notice that the two graphs look similar. One has a larger demand, the other one has a larger supply. The change looks like initially a change in demand, slightly different in supply. Depends on, this one is a change in demand on the left. On the right, it's a change in supply. The larger is on the supply. We increase supply, drops the price on the right-hand side. On the left, we increase demand, it increases the price. Same goes to the opposite direction. So Harmattan and the price of chocolate. So Harmattan is a dry, dusty wind from Sahara Desert, and I know I don't say it right. Each year it sweeps through the cocoa plantations in Ghana and the Ivory Coast, drying out the cocoa pods, and it shrinks how much cocoa beans we have. In 2015, it was longer than its usual typical 14 days, instead of its 5 days, which is normal. So the crops were lower than usual, decreasing the supply. That increases the price for cocoa beans. If you notice that, somebody said, no, you can't have chocolate, that's fine. We can predict changes in our market. We can sit here and watch the fluctuations. We use this information on price and quantity. We can determine what's going to change. If we use our demand and supply models, we have shown how equilibrium prices are determined and how those changes in demand and supply affect equilibrium prices and quantity. If you drive down the street, you see a long line at McDonald's, you keep driving by. That's this model. That's what we're explaining here. When demand changes, both the equilibrium price and the quantity change in the same direction as demand changes, increasing or decreasing. When supply changes, the equilibrium quantity changes in the same direction as the supply change, but the price changes in the opposite direction. Memorize this chart. It will help you understand those shifts. It will help you explain what is happening when demand and supply change. We use this knowledge to predict how prices and quantities will change and respond to a demand or supply change. We can also use this knowledge in reverse. So everything that's here, flip it. If we know the price and quantity of a product both rose or fell, we should expect a change in demand caused the changes. Conversely, if the price and quantity of a product moved in the opposite direction, we can infer a change in supply occurred. We can predict what's going to happen to prices. We don't have to have inflation. We can watch how people behave. We watch how people behave. If you see a storm of people going after vans, don't buy vans. The price is going to go up. Do you know what happens to the price of drugs in the United States? The price of cocaine, way down. The price of marijuana, way down. You don't have to be an expert in economics to know that when the price goes down, it means that more stuff is coming in. That's supply and demand. This came from a newscast by Ted Koppel. He was host of the ABC news program Nightline. You could probably Google this and watch it. But was he right? That is, did falling drug prices prove the U.S. government's war on drugs was failing and that supply of illegal drugs was increasing? Well, yeah. When you flood the market, when everybody is buying and we still have excess supply, the price has got to go down. That means that there are going to be more drug users. Same thing goes up. When there's not a supply, it's going to get expensive, less likely to have drug users. There are two possible explanations. One, the hypothesis, supply rose, resulting in lower prices and higher quantities. Or the alternative, demand fell, nobody wanted to do drugs, resulting in lower prices and lower quantities. Go watch the news. According to the U.S. Department of Justice, during this time, falling prices, drug consumption actually decreased. Amazing. This suggested that the alternative explanation is more likely to be correct. The war on drugs actually slowed demand. You heard the commercials, this is your brain, and they crack an egg, and it's hot, and the egg fries, and they said, this is your brain on drugs. That was the psychological commercials that the war on drugs put out during this time frame. Decreasing in its popularity. All right, so now you understand that, see, even advertising can adjust your demand and supply. So keep this in mind. If you did not get this chapter, I need for you to go back and rewatch it. Stop it where you need to stop it. And then if you still don't get it, ask the question. Send me an email and say, hey, I don't get it. And then I can go from there, okay? But this is so important to everything else we do. If you don't get this chapter, I can't go forward. So I'm going to attempt to go forward. We're going to see how you do on the test. I suggest that you get as much of this under control, or this is going to be a very long semester, and you'll be so upset. But hopefully some of this clicked, and we can move forward. Please, if you've got a question, make sure you ask it.